Data is mission critical today, providing IT companies with the insight needed to compete, innovate, strategize, and succeed, according to Crawford Del Prete, president of IDC. The respected research executive joins Beyond Distribution host Frank Vitagliano for an engaging discussion on the state of the industry, including the peaks and valleys of the past few years and outlook for 2024. Which tech advances will provide a solid boost to the hardware market? Here, Del Prete discussed the answers and share a teaser about his upcoming Summit North America keynote in this episode of Beyond Distribution with GTDC.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our next episode of Beyond Distribution. I'm delighted today to have Crawford Del Prete, who is the president of IDC. Crawford, welcome.
Hey, how are you, Frank? Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
It's really good to see you, and it's good to continue our relationship. As many of the folks know who listen in, we have, for 2 years now, we've had a tremendous relationship, GTDC and IDC, and we're continuing that. So I'm delighted that we're able to work together going into 2024.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're thrilled about the partnership as well. It's been an incredibly successful partnership, both from a knowledge standpoint and an ability for us to deliver a new set of data to the marketplace. And on a personal note, Frank, I think you and I have known each other for many, many, many years. And it's great to be able to work with you in this capacity in your role at the GTDC, as opposed to previous roles we both had.
Yeah, well, speaking of that, then talk a little bit about yourself and maybe perhaps your journey, through the various roles to where you got to today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been with IDC for many, many, many years. I joined actually in the late 1980s, believe it or not. I was in the financial services industry. I worked for a company called Harlan Decisions, and before that was at a company that's now was known as UBS. For those of you that have been around a long time, it was an investment firm called Payne Weber that I was at for many, for a short period of time when I started my career. I joined IDC. I was really contemplating the equity analyst path and decided that I wanted to become a technology analyst. And so I joined this company called IDC that has grown as my career has grown, coincidentally. I think one of the reasons that I enjoy working so much with the channel is that my career at IDC as an analyst was very much on the enterprise infrastructure and the hardware side of the business. I actually started in the storage area, covering companies like EMC, covering companies like Hewlett Packard, and Dell. In those days, Dell was mostly a PC server manufacturer. But as my career progressed, I ultimately became more interested in focused on the enterprise infrastructure space, then the application software space, then the services space. And then about, it's almost 15 years ago now, I was named our chief research officer. So became chief research officer of the company, which was really setting the research agenda for the entire company in the areas that we focused on. And that, of course, as you would know, Frank, was coincident with the cloud and with the beginnings of the cloud and sort of this idea of software as a service and what we called in those days, because in this industry, we tend to complicate things. We called it service-oriented architecture in those days, but ultimately became SaaS and set our research agenda around the journey associated with the cloud. And then about 6 years ago became our chief operating officer, and then about 5 years ago became our president. And I'm just thrilled with the progress that we've made. The team has worked super, super hard through many, many different twists and turns. And just, really, really proud of what we've been able to achieve at IDC over the last 30 years, but, even more recently, over the last 10, as the industry has evolved, I've seen IDC reinvent itself. And I think it's really near and dear to many distributors. I look at many of the companies that participate in the channel. Those companies have reinvented themselves 4, 5, 6 times in my career as technology has changed, and IDC has very much followed a similar path.
Yeah, that's a really incredible, impressive path, and certainly, what IDC does and has been doing, this whole area of market intelligence is really important to the industry. One of the things that a lot of people I don't think understand about IDC, and even I was surprised having known you guys for a long time, is just the breadth of the services that you
Yeah.
guys provide. And just for example, the number of analysts you have. I can't find a category in the IT space where you don't have experts running around talking about it.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. So thank you. Yeah. So we have over 1,100 analysts that are based in over 50 countries around the world. So we talk about we're based in about 52 countries around the world, but we cover over 100 countries. And so you get into some of the smaller countries around. You have an analyst covering 2 or 3 countries, but we do this because we really believe that technology is changing the world, and we believe the way to understand technology is to be in those local markets. It's not hard to estimate the market from your apartment somewhere and kind of call it worldwide data. And there are a lot of people that do a decent job of doing that, but it's very, very different if you're working with import-export records, or if you're working with local inventories, and understanding when a large school district in Italy is going to bring down a deal for Chromebooks, and that's going to make the market look really, really strange for one quarter. But you can explain it, and you can provide that value to a company locally to understand why demand is maybe fluctuating in a specific region. And so, the term that you've all heard, but we really live it every day, is global. So it's sort of global research, but it's at the it's at the local level. And we really very, very strongly believe that that is a tremendous differentiator for an IDC, whether you're covering SaaS or whether you're covering PCs or whether you're covering mobile phones. I mean, we have over 100 analysts in China, and understanding how Huawei is adopting their own app store, understanding how Huawei is now wooing high-end customers away from Apple, something that nobody ever thought was possible. We see that every day on the ground in our offices in Beijing, in Shenzhen, and I think that's a real differentiator for us.
Yeah, it is for sure. I mean, I know personally, I've met with some of your analysts in various parts of the world, and
Yeah.
it's incredible to me that what they're able to combine is sort of what you described as the overall macro, and we'll talk about macro environment in a few minutes, but the macro environment with kind of on the street, which brings us to a little bit of the what we did together, because what we did together by building the North America distributor tracking mechanism provided you the next level of detail in the space that we share, and that's a great example of how you guys just kind of dig in, and you're able to really provide information from the ground up, and it's useful.
Yeah, that's right. And we deal. It's funny because people believe and people think that IDC operates in sort of these exclusively in these massive data sets, like you would see a TRW or an Experian or one of these companies operate in these huge data sets. And the truth is that we do operate in big data sets, but we really operate in data sets that, by comparison to an Experian, are relatively small, but they are super, super valuable. And a term I use with my team a lot is it's very, very precious data. IDC doesn't do a lot of, we do some aggregation of data, but we do a lot of creating of data that doesn't exist by having those 1,100 analysts all around the world. And I believe strongly that our next chapter is taking that data that doesn't exist, that we create, combining it with data that we can source, like the data from the North American Distribution Tracker, and creating new levels of insights that never existed before. And I really believe that that is a tremendous differentiator in value. And then you combine that with, we'll talk about this later in the conversation, but you combine that with AI, and I think you've got some incredible opportunities to really assist people in decision-making and assist people with complicated problems that otherwise would have taken hours and hours and hours to research in ways that no one ever thought possible just a few years ago.
Yeah, it's true. It's funny when we started working together and people, asked us about the relationship, the way I positioned it was we were very interested in having a partner that not only can tell us what the data was, but
Right.
also tell us what happened, why it happened, and then hopefully give us some insight into what might happen. And
Right.
that's the piece that really becomes valuable, particularly in our industry, because in our industry, people are looking at that data all the time to make critical decisions on, how many units do I build? How do I price the units? How do we market the units? What do we tell the board? What do we tell Wall Street, in terms of what's happening? That all of those items, all of those questions are answered with the data that we jointly have, and for us that's really valuable, really valuable.
Absolutely. And we take that very, very, very seriously. And, our analysts, I know on a personal note and our analysts as well, we're talking to those CEOs on a regular basis in terms of helping them understand where those pricing trends are going, why we're seeing the pricing trends that we're seeing, and helping them interpret that data. It's incredibly valuable, and it's again, our vision and our mission is to really, help the world understand the impact of technology on business and society. And we all take that incredibly seriously because our data is used by so many different constituents to make, very, very important decisions.
Yeah, mission critical. So Crawford, changing courses just a little bit, but
Yeah.
kind of staying on the general theme. As we look into our crystal ball for 2024, there's a lot of macroeconomic trends out there that are troubling, frankly, right? And some of them have been in place for a while, like discussions about U.S. recession and things like that, and some
Mhm.
of them are relatively new, like wars in the Middle East and things like
Yeah.
that. What's your view, at sort of a high level on some of the things that we need to watch for as we begin 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I wish the news were a little bit better, Frank, but I think that the truth is that we're going to need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable in the marketplace. There's a lot of uncertainty, and I think you're going to see that this uncertain market and this ability to understand and rationalize, not rationalize, but be able to quickly in an agile way take action when you're dealt a very uncertain situation is going to continue. And whether that's um whether there's a lane for a soft landing from an economic standpoint, it's very clear that we are going to see the Fed, I think, based on the actions that we saw in the most recent Fed meeting, interest rates are beginning to come down. We're starting to see, positive signs there. And I think that we will continue to see, rates have more downward pressure than upward pressure from the Fed. I think that will open up a lane for a higher probability of a soft landing, but I still wouldn't rule out, based on the economic signals that we see, that we may see a relatively shallow recession. Now, it may be one of those recessions that you open up the Wall Street Journal one day and it says, "Hey, you've been in a recession," and you're kind of like, "Well, this is kind of what a recession feels like." It's not a deep recession like you and I would remember from, say, 1982 or 1981, but it could be that kind of a situation. I
Yeah.
think, we are going to see a lot of instability in the Middle East. We have a very, very difficult situation in Israel right now, and it's just tragic. And unfortunately, that translates into a lot of uncertainty in that region, which can translate into oil prices being elevated, shocks associated with, and again, petroleum is a very, very important commodity that we continue to use. Now, having said that, we're seeing economies around the world respond by continuing to use technology like oil sands technology and shale technology to balance the situation with higher oil prices. So I think that, it's really that last bit of what I said. It's not that we're going to see a less unstable marketplace. The market's going to be just as unstable. The situation will be, how do we respond to that? How does the world respond to these very, very mixed signals that we're going to see? And I believe that, what we're seeing outside of some of the instability in the Middle East and the war in the Middle East is we're seeing an economic reverberation from the pandemic, right? We stimulated the economy. We put so much money into economies around the world during the pandemic, and we saw a ramp up, and now we've seen a ramp down associated with spending in IT. And so, interestingly, the situation that we're facing in IT is that we actually believe we'll see a bit of an IT recovery in 2024. I think we could see, we'll see somewhere around 5% growth for IT in 23. I think we could see a 100 basis points better, about 6% growth next year. And I think that that will be fueled by a few things. It'll be fueled by a little bit stronger demand for the cloud, where the cloud kind of cooled off and infrastructure as a service came down to about 18% growth. We'll probably see that get back up over 20% annual growth for the cloud. And then I think near and dear to a lot of distributors' hearts, we're going to see the PC start to come back. We saw, you couldn't find a PC during the pandemic back in 2020, back in 2021. Now here we are 4 years on, PCs, they break, they wear out, they get dropped, things happen. And so we're seeing that, we're going to likely see a new refresh cycle associated with PCs. We're going to see Microsoft make a very important decision around Windows 11, and there'll likely be an end of life there. So we'll see the need for a new upgrade cycle. And wait for it, Frank, we're going to see AI embedded into PCs.
I knew that was coming.
And as you see AI embedded into PCs, that's going to drive a new set of apps and a new set of workloads that leverage data that's closer to the point of decision, perhaps in a less connected way, and so need to do more local processing. And all these things are going to fuel PC demand, which will drive some of that 5 to 6% growth that I saw, that I talked about for next year.
Yeah, that's a great recap, because you hit a lot of things there. You mentioned two things there, actually three, that I want to go back to. One is cloud, certainly, and we've seen, it's funny, Crawford, when I go back 10, 12 years or so, and I think about sort of cloud and the evolution of cloud, it started out kind of slowly, and people were trying to figure out, where the uses were, how to monetize it, how it was going to play out. And it's certainly there, and it's pervasive. Do you forecast or continue to see significant growth in the sort of the cloud space, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, our expectation is that we will, continue to see enterprises move more and more workloads to the cloud. But, it's important to say that, that number will be around half of those workloads, but all workloads will continue to grow, right? So it's not as if we expect to see that on-premise goes away and that, cloud sort of takes over the world. I mean, actually, if you kind of click down on it into a little bit, it's very different given, different customer segments. But a large customer segment, they're going to have probably more of an investment in cloud because they've learned that, the cloud is more secure. The cloud gives you a level of flexibility that you wouldn't necessarily have if you hadn't moved to a cloud. And these are important words, a cloud-like architecture, even on premise. So I think what you're going to see with large enterprises is they're moving more to a hybrid cloud environment where maybe, more than or around half of their workloads are going to be in the cloud, but they're also going to have a significant number of workloads that are going to be in hybrid environments. They're going to be on premise, but in a cloud environment that they have similar flexibility and ability to manage across their on-premise environment and to their cloud environment.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to continue to be a trend. And I think you're going to continue to see that companies are going to burst to the cloud when they need to. They're going to move some workloads to the cloud, maybe for security reasons, but they're still going to want to have that cloud-like architecture within their four walls for data that they're just not comfortable, or for performance reasons that they don't necessarily want to move to the cloud. Now, what's interesting is that we think that the SMBs, which is where a lot of the distributors tend to sell, they've been behind this curve, right? They haven't been able to invest in the cloud at the same rate. And we do think that, one of our key predictions is by 2025, 30% of SMBs worldwide will have moved half of their workloads to the cloud, right? So that's an important inflection point that we're going to get to over the next 2 years here, because that says that all these distributors that maybe have been moving sort of traditional gear into SMBs, they're seeing now more and more SMBs starting to understand the value of the cloud, understand the flexibility that the cloud brings. And I think that that speaks volumes to how the market is progressing, but it also speaks volumes to how the selling motions of these resellers need to continue to evolve to meet the needs of these small and medium businesses around the world as they embrace the cloud.
That's great. That's very enlightening. Now that percentage that you mentioned,
Yeah.
that's coming from where? In other words, would that be a 50% increase, a 70% increase? What?
Yeah. So that's coming from depending upon when you count it, but where we are now, that's definitely a more than 20% increase. That from but again, it's going to be different from small to medium-sized businesses. It's going to be different from geography, but I guarantee it's a double-digit increase.
Yeah, well, and then what it does is, and I have to tell you, Crawford, in my discussions and with both the distributors and the distributor customers, the solution providers, they're very bullish about their opportunities going into 2024. And a lot of it is related to that. A lot of it's related to services opportunities and different kinds of opportunities, right? And you mentioned hardware earlier, right? Which is near and dear to all of our hearts because we grew up selling it. But clearly, I think we will see, the PC, the laptop, the endpoint device market, if you will, come back, right? And that's before the big technology enhancements like AI PCs and those kinds of things. We'll see that come back. And it's never going to go away. But where the opportunity clearly appears to be in the next few years is sort of in the services space for the solution providers and also for the distributors who are helping them get into that space with new technologies, particularly, AI and of course SaaS and software, continue to be significant. So, but going back to hardware for a minute, you kind of indicated you'd see it coming back. What's your sense in terms of the impact that quote unquote AI PCs could have on the marketplace? Because
sure. So I think that the majority of so let's put some numbers around it. So if you look at PCs and tablets, in 23, that market was down in dollars about 14%. We think it'll be up in dollars about 4 or 5% next year. Okay. Most of that swing is going to be on a refresh cycle. So actually, and it's funny, you talk to guys like Enrique, the CEO, and Loris, the CEO of HPI, he'll talk about a multi-year cycle for PCs. And I think he's onto something there, because I'm going to get to your answer. I think that the majority of the growth you're going to see in PCs next year, and even into the first half of 25, okay, fine, AI will get a lot of ink. But the reality is it's going to be on the refresh cycle, and it's going to be on the end of life cycle associated with Windows 11. You have to rethink jobs. You have to rethink how people get their work done. You have to build applications and services in order to allow people to take advantage of AI at the edge. So that's going to take some time. Right, that's going to take, a kind of deboning of job processes, and understanding how these applications can be built and then applied to specific roles within organizations that are going to allow people to take advantage of these services, because you don't just dream these things up overnight. So I actually think Enrique's got a point where you could see a refresh cycle throughout 24 and into 25. Then you see the emergent. Now, again, you and I go back in hardware, right? All this stuff kind of comes along for the ride, right? So this technology is shipped into PCs. It's embedded. Now, all of a sudden, people are starting to light it up. And they start lighting it up in 25. They start taking advantage of it in 25. Oh, and then guess what? That fuels the demand for more PCs like that, with those technologies, with those capabilities that allow you to take advantage of AI and these new AI workloads and applications that'll get invented. So that could actually allow us to see nice mid-single-digit growth for PCs for a couple of years going forward, on what ends up being an elongated cycle. So I'm actually quite intrigued by what could happen on the client side, and we could see new life for what I would argue may be one of the most useful devices. Certainly that and the mobile phone are some of the most useful devices we've ever created on this planet. But where people left this category for dead, in 2019 before the pandemic, it's kind of interesting. And then they certainly left it for dead again after the pandemic. Kind of interesting to see people potentially relying on it in a new way going forward.
Yeah, it was funny. Your team, when I was with your team at the end of 22, they signaled to us what was happening, right? It was build up in inventory, things was going to slow down, and pretty much predicted and did a really good job of what happened in 2023. The good news is we seem to have sort of survived that, and now we're kind of working through it, right?
Yeah.
And everybody's getting excited about, the next step. So Crawford, kind of in closing out a little bit, one of the things that I think a lot of our listeners know, because a lot of our listeners attend our event, pay attention to GTDC, but last year you were a keynote speaker at our North America event. And it went so well that the participants asked for you to come back. And so I appreciate the fact that you'll be back this year at our event. It's February 7th and 8th in the San Diego area. And I know you're going to talk a little bit about and expand on kind of what we've discussed.
Yeah.
So give us a kind of a quick overview of what you're thinking, what you're going to cover there, because I think we're really interested.
Yeah, sure. So, what I'm going to talk about, and by the way, thank you for having me back. It's a great event. It's a special group to me, because this has been a group that I've seen evolve, and I've seen this group. And when it was interesting last year, looking out at the audience, seeing so many faces that I know from over the years. So it's just great to see so many people. But it's a group that has, like I said earlier, reinvented itself and evolved. And so I'm really interested in sharing some of these insights. I'll talk about the state of demand. I'll talk about how demand is changing and some of the macroeconomic factors that are in play. I'll talk about some of the eras of computing and how we got to where we are today, and how I believe that we're kind of exiting this wonderful golden era of technology that we saw evolve with the cloud, and how we've sort of set the stage for a new era of technology. And that new era of technology is really fueled by AI, and how AI will change the world in ways many people aren't maybe thinking about today. I'll talk about how enterprises are thinking about AI, so let me take a step back. I'll talk about what's fueling demand today. So I'll talk about whether that's, on the hardware side, what those categories look like. I'll talk about why software is so resilient. I'll talk about why services are so important going forward. I'll talk about the era of AI, and then within the era of AI, how AI will likely evolve over the next few years. Additionally, I want to spend some time interacting with the audience around what some of the customer perceptions around AI are, what customers are concerned about, where customers are investing, where customers are maybe scratching their head and saying, am I going to see a payback here? And then talk about some of the risks associated with AI and what we need as an industry to be mindful of. And so I'd like to be able to really spend some time thinking about, in short, the next chapter of the industry. I believe that this period we've gone through from 2015 to 2021 has been a marvelous time of technology innovation, but I believe it's set the table for an explosion in technology. And I think you see it in the numbers, and I'll talk about it in the numbers, where technology, we depend on it in ways that is very, very different from the old days. In the old days, we depended on technology as something that could process our data, but it was really very much a hardware and software welded together that we would use as a package. And frankly, when demand got slow, we could stop that. We could say, you know what, I'm not going to spend on PCs. I'm not going to spend on servers. I'm not going to spend. That's all changed now. Now we have technology that's inside the central nervous system of our companies. And so you're not going to back away from technology. As a matter of fact, I can make the argument you're going to invest in technology in down cycles in order to get a competitive advantage. Well, what does that mean for AI? How should companies think about that? How should companies think about their data in relation to AI and what the risks are, what the opportunities are, and how they can give employees new skills and new opportunity with AI? Those are some of the things I'd like to talk about when we get together in February.
Yeah, well, I can't wait. I can't wait. That's a great list. The other thing that we're doing as part of the event is Eric Prothro and your team is also going to host a panel on data.
Great.
You and I talked about that, and I think that's going to be really important because there's a lot of discussion about sources and use of data, and how do we do that? And that's partly talking about AI and how AI sort of impacts that. But more importantly, just the overall how you ought to view data and what it ought to, how you ought to be acting in the things that are being done at the in the company. So,
absolutely, and I'm really appreciative of that because I think that companies need to really think about their data strategy. And it really and one of my key messages, and I know Eric will talk about it as well, is it all really starts with your data, and it starts with how you think about categorizing your data, structuring your data, that, of course, if you don't get that right, you got a real problem going forward. And it's what we've built a business on, and I want to encourage others to think about that as a real way to differentiate their businesses.
Totally. Well, Crawford, this has been great. I really appreciate it. I can't wait to see you in person out February 7th and 8th at our event. Anybody that's listening and sees this, if you haven't registered yet, register because we'd love to have you. Crawford,
Yeah, we look forward to it. Thanks, Frank.